Hello, I'm Shelley West, and welcome to Cooking Modern Classics. On today's show, we'll be making Chateaubriand with a rosemary red wine reduction and truffle mashed potatoes. Sounds delicious? It is. Complicated? Not at all, and I'll prove it to you by cooking the entire meal in heels. Chateaubriand refers to the center cut of the tenderloin. It's the nice, big, thick, juicy piece of meat that I have right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sear it off, and then I'm going to encase it in a salty meringue crust. I know it sounds unusual, but once you've tried it, you will never have tenderloin any other way. It's delicious. So first we're going to add some flavor. A little bit of olive oil, drizzle it on, rub it all around, get it nice and coated. Wipe my hands. And then a generous amount of salt. I'm using kosher salt. I like using kosher salt. And rub that all around. Get it nice and coated. And ground black pepper. I use fresh ground black pepper. There we go. And then we're going to sear it off in a hot skillet. I've got this cast iron skillet that I've heated up to medium-high heat. You want a nice high heat because you want to sear the outside. And we'll just put our meat in there. Hear that sizzle? So what searing does is it gives it a nice crust flavor on the outside. It doesn't actually sear in the juices. That's an old wives' tale from an era gone by. We'll just sear this off. Well, now that we've seared off our Chateaubriand and it's looking quite lovely, we're going to set it aside to cool and make our salty meringue crust. What we need is 2 egg whites, room temperature. At room temperature, they just whip better. So put that into our bowl and let it rip. So let it whip for a couple of minutes until you've got a nice, stiff meringue. Okay, this we're going to add 1 cup of salt. Just use table salt. You don't need a fancy salt for this. Put that in and fold it in. And be careful when you're folding it. You don't want to deflate the egg white. You want everything nice and fluffy. That looks good. Now we're going to build our house. So what we need is a baking sheet with a piece of parchment. Parchment just ensures that it doesn't stick. And we'll build the foundation. So we're going to put a little slab on about the size of the tenderloin, a little bigger. Place our lovely tenderloin right in the middle, thusly, and then we're going to cover the whole thing up. We're making a salty meringue house. So we cover it completely, nice thick layer. All right, so we're completely covered, which is great. Just going to wipe my hands. And now we're going to put it in the oven. And I'm going to bake this at 400 degrees for 10 minutes. And what that's going to do is that's going to set the meringue and seal it all in. And then we're going to turn it down to 300 degrees and cook it for about 20 to 25 minutes. But we'll be checking it with the meat thermometer. Move this aside. There we go. In it goes. All right, now we wait. Oh, and I'm still wearing my heels. Now that the Chateaubriand is cooking in the oven, we're going to make the rosemary red wine reduction. It's a delicious sauce that goes great with the meat. And it's simple, just a few steps. We need shallots, which I peel and dice. Don't worry about how the uniformity of them because we're going to strain them out later. And that's half a cup, which is about one of these shallots about this size or 2 smaller ones. We're going to take our saucepan and on medium-low heat, you don't want to cook it too high because shallots tend to burn, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter. I like using unsalted butter because you can control your own seasoning. So we just put that in the pan, let it melt. Then we add our shallots. And 1 teaspoon of kosher salt, or sea salt, and 1 teaspoon of ground black pepper. Freshly ground black pepper is the best. So we stir that around. And we're going to cook the shallots until they're nice and soft, a little bit caramelized. Takes about 5 minutes. Now that our shallots are lovely and golden brown, just look at that, yummy. They smell fantastic. We're going to add the beef stock, and I'm using a homemade beef stock, but there's great products out there you can buy, lots on the market. We're going to add 1.5 cups of beef stock. There we go. And red wine, 1.5 cups of red wine. And use a full-bodied red wine like a Shiraz or a Cabernet, something with a nice full body. That's about 1.5 cups. And fresh rosemary. Always use fresh herbs when you can. It makes such a difference. So you put that in. And we're going to crank up the heat because we have to reduce this by about 2/3. There's about 3 cups of liquid in there, and we want to get it down to about 1 cup. I usually end up with about 3/4 of the cup because I'm chatting and having a martini, but that's okay too. So it takes about half an hour to reduce down, so be patient. Now that our sauce has been reduced and it looks amazing, down to about, looks like about 3/4 of a cup, but I wasn't chatting or having a martini, we're going to strain it. Take a small saucepan and just a sieve and just strain it over. We want to get out the rosemary and the shallots. Okay. Wow, look at that color. So now we're going to add 2 teaspoons of brown sugar, 1 teaspoon of balsamic vinegar, and 1/2 teaspoon of soy sauce. All right, give it a little stir. Mix those ingredients together. A little taste. Oh, that is so good. It's so intense. So that's ready to go. There's your sauce. We'll just put that to the back of the stove, put a lid on it until we're ready to serve, and that's done. Mashed potatoes are a classic favorite, and I'm making these ones extra special by adding truffle oil. Everybody asks me, why are your mashed potatoes so tasty? Well, it's no secret, butter and cream. You need to add butter and cream. It's not a diet food. Just don't eat a mountain of them, or do, and own it. So for these mashed potatoes, I'm going to use Yukon Golds. I really like Yukon Golds because they're nice and starchy and they've got a great flavor. I usually use about 1 medium potato per person per serving. Works out great every time. For more rustic menus, I like to keep the skin on, but for this one, I'm going to peel it because it's a little more refined, like me. So once you've peeled and quartered the potatoes, put them in cold water and boil them for about 30 minutes until they're fork tender. When they're done, strain them and then put them back in the pot where it's warm so they can release some of their moisture. This will help them receive the butter and the cream with greater enthusiasm. So we have our potatoes and they're nice and dried out, and we're going to add 1/4 cup of cream, heavy whipping cream, don't let me see you using skim milk, 1/4 cup of unsalted butter, teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of white pepper. I like white pepper because it keeps the color nice and uniform. And truffle oil. Now there's 2 kinds of truffle oils. There's black truffle oil and white truffle oil. Black truffle oil is French and the white is Italian. And I think they're both good. They're both quite delicious, but I'm sure Francois and Lorenzo would have something to say about that. But anyways, I'm going to use the white truffle oil. So I'm going to use 2 teaspoons. About that, maybe a little more. When you're making mashed potatoes, make sure you add all the ingredients at once. That way you mash them all at one time, because if you over mash them, the gluten gets stimulated and they get really, really gluey. And once that happens, there's just no going back. I know, I've tried it. So we'll mash these up. And you can make these potatoes ahead of time. I mean, if you're making them à la minute, which is the time of the dinner, then you can just keep them warm on the back of the stove. They retain their heat for about 20 minutes. But otherwise, you can put them in a glass bowl, microwave them. And if you don't want to use a microwave, put them in a metal bowl and put them over some boiling water. Let them steam. That'll heat them up nicely without drying them out. Both methods work great. The Chateaubriand has been in the oven for about 40 minutes now, so I'm going to take it out because it's ready. Doesn't that look incredible? It's reached an internal temperature of 130 degrees, which is a perfect medium rare. And you want to check the temperature after about 20 minutes and then again every 5 minutes. Don't worry about checking it, it'll just slow down the cooking process, but then you'll get a perfect medium rare piece of meat. So we have to let that rest for 15 minutes. Very important to let your meat rest, because what happens during the cooking process is those juices all gather in the center of the meat, and when you let it rest, it relaxes and then they disperse back into the meat. And you get a really juicy Chateaubriand, which is what you want. So this one's been resting for 15 minutes, and we're going to crack it open. Doesn't that look amazing? I know. So we take a knife and just crack it in a couple of spots and then just peel it off. Look at that. Crazy. Okay, and just lift it out. And what we're going to do is put it on a cutting board, and I'm going to slice into it. You're going to see how beautifully cooked it is. Any sort of little bits and pieces you can just brush off with a pastry brush. Okay. So now I'm going to slice into it. Look at that. Isn't that a thing of beauty? It's nice and brown on the outside, nice caramel crust, and perfectly cooked right from the edge right to the middle, a perfect medium rare. Well, let's go to the plate because I can't wait to try this. Now that everything's prepared, we're going to go to the plate. Here I have a nice warm white plate to showcase the food, and I'm going to put a dollop of truffle mashed potatoes right in the center. I'm using an ice cream scoop because it just is a perfect little mound. Look at that. And our perfectly cooked Chateaubriand, just beautifully draped across the potato. Does that look good or what? We've got some green beans, and we're just going to lay them alongside. Look at the color on that. Don't you love it? And our rosemary red wine reduction. Beautiful, intense flavor. We're just going to drizzle that just in front of the meat on the plate. Ooh, that's a beautiful thing. And to finish it all off, a little garnish, a little rosemary garnish. There you go. Look at that. Isn't that fantastic? It's a feast fit for le roi. Oh, that's French for king, by the way. Pish posh. I'm Shelley West. Oh, and I'm still wearing my heels. Bon appetit.